Say a residential site, a residential group.
Where is it?
What does that mean?
In other words, what would normally be a group of people who, in a hunting-gathering situation, were related, traveled together.
And what about a jamboree? The ritual objects that they use there.
There's another point here, I think, also. This is to get at the association. The association, and this would be one activity representation. It could be an assemblage. That would be one activity representation of an industry. So could a workshop. It would be and it would have to use these in order to define these parameters of such an industry. Represented by the kill, or represented by the
Or
workshop.
couldn't this one activity area be actually not a representative of an industry, but a representative of one part of certain activities which are set up by one group, and if it's one group in one little place, in one area, in one time zone, would you call it an industry? If you have three different activity areas.
I would not call a workshop an industry.
But it may be part of an industry.
But maybe part of it.
I think you hit the key word when you said association. This is really, however you choose to exactly word it, this is really what we're talking about, things which we believe to be closely associated by a short period of time and common origin out of human activity.
Yeah, this is why I never understood why the attempt was made to define aggregate outside of its context in the Bergwijn study, because the important fact is not the tools as much as the relationships of the artifacts to each other in the ground, and this is what you base your basic assessment on.
But this is part of the process of judging whether the stone tools are more than an aggregate, that they're also a sample of an assemblage. And there is an act of judgment. You take the field data and what the chap tells you about.
You're making a judgment when you say they're tools. You're
okay, but let's
all I'm saying
let's agree that we can recognize.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is that the relationships.
Well, anyway, the aggregate, perhaps one of the first judgments that you also apply to the aggregate is whether they're tools or not. Where we agree that it was a heap of objects, and someone might come along to the aggregate somewhere and say, well, they aren't tools at all anyway. Then the argument stops.
I'd like to go back to a point that you raised. There is in biology, and perhaps someday in our lifetimes we can have in archaeology and prehistory, a sufficient level of sophistication in our studies so that they can be agreed upon levels of standards. And this does not require fossilized type lists, but levels of standards, scientific responsibility. For instance, and we have been guilty of this, of transgressing these standards that we might propose now. What standards could a group of archaeologists represented here agree would be necessary for the naming of an industry? What are those standards? What do you need to give? Will a one-site representation assemblage be sufficient to give an industrial name that you're using the capital I industry?
My feeling is no, one site is not enough, and that one has, again, if I may refer to the levels of abstraction, you have a number of sites or occurrences. From those you have taken aggregates or assemblages, and when you have a large number, and I would hesitate to be any more specific than a large number scattered over a region, and again I would rather not refine or define what I mean by region, some geographical space fairly extensive, then I'm happy to listen to the word industry. If it hangs together, if they repeat themselves.
What about Oldowan?
We haven't just got Oldowan at Oldaway Gorge.
In the base of bed, let's say in bed one at Oldaway, as far as anybody knows, all you have are things which are reasonably assumed can be defined in some way or other and recognized as falling together and differing from other things. Okay, you can do something with them in terms of their context, their associations, and their age. And let's imagine, which is largely true, maybe 100% true, they don't occur anywhere else, as far as we know. Seems to me you're completely justified in giving them a name.
But this is from more than one site, is
It's
it
from more
not?
than one
It's
site.
from the,
Well,
from the entire.
let's imagine all you had is the Zinj floor.
Yeah, but we haven't.
Surely
You can
the
see-
criterion here is utility. And I think if we've been looking at biological classification, we can look for a moment at stratigraphic classification. People don't normally set up formations for one outcrop. There are other devices, like you can talk with the such and such beds and just give it the individual locality.
Oh,
and
well,
form.
now, wait, that's in fact,
But-
in geology, that is not exactly so.
Well,
because
what
you
I'm saying
do,
is
in
that there's a
fact,
choice.
You know,
You can or you can't, and I'm sure that we as archaeologists have this choice too. If there's some good reason, like the importance of the bed one Olduvai stuff, even if there was only one grand site, some good reason for doing it, then you can do it. We should have a system that would allow you to do it. On the other hand, it might readily be agreed that it wouldn't be useful to fill the literature of archaeology with single site represented industries. That very often it would be better if you only had one site, just to
We're
leave it
after
at the occurrence
culture,
level.
we're after patterned behavior. One site doesn't give us a pattern.
Oh, it might.
I don't think so.
no, but what if, there's only one unique occurrence?
What of
That's all
quality?
there ever is. I mean, maybe you look for 1,000,000 years, you never find any more.
Well,
It seems to me that's even more reason to recognize its uniqueness and give it
I would differ with you, Mark, on this ground. I'm not saying that you shouldn't give it a name. Call it anything you want to. That's a mnemonic device. But I should say you should not call that an
An
industry.
industry, yes.
Now, that's where I'm making,
Yes.
see, an industry, I should say, well, I would have, when I use the word industry, and I would hope I'd convince you that when you use the word industry, it'll have very specific connotation. And these things, it should have a defined area, therefore it's gotta have more than one locality.
Yes, you asked the question in terms of the industry with a big I, actually, and in this case, I would agree with you. Yeah.
I don't really see, in practical terms, how you decide how many occurrences you need. Do you do it when the variance describes a normal curve, or do you do it when, when you find 5 sites are exactly the same, or what do you do? How do you?
Yes, when you find 5 sites liberally scattered over the countryside and they do throw up percentage frequencies which are the same, I'd be prepared to fall for the word industry, capital I.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we were being asked to do here,
Yes.
just to
Yeah.
define some sort of arbitrary bounds.
No, I
No.
would disagree. The mature sciences in this kind of matter leave it to the discretion of good scholars, and I think this is the only sound procedure.
I wasn't
Yeah.
advocating that. I think I understood that to be one of the things we were being asked to consider here.
No, I don't think we had intended that arbitrary boundaries be set, but to consider the kind of problem that arises when you have this sort of situation where you have 2 assemblages. I think we're all agreed that a single assemblage isn't an industry.
Yeah.
Now, if we're agreed that it isn't an industry, we have some reason for it, though it's not usually very well articulated. Does that reason spill over to 2 assemblages? If it doesn't, then there's some essential difference between a single assemblage and 2 assemblages that are the same. I would say the more you had, the better off you would be,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. Your case becomes stronger and
Yeah.
stronger the more like assemblages you add to it. Now we're only talking about space and its spatial distribution. Now we're up against the problem of the chronological boundaries as well, as it were, the vertical boundaries.
I feel the
this
term
is now
industry
we're getting
implies
into it.
both time and
Oh
space.
yes, oh yes, agreed, but exactly how we cut these off, because so often in the archaeological record in the ground, the boundaries are phased, they're fuzzed rather, blurred. Simply, well, it may be through real human activity or maybe through geological processes or just trampling one of these things. They do get mixed. I'm not sure I'm competent to talk about this, quite honestly. I think it's very complex.
Well, it seemed, one of the things that I think is contained in the definition of an industry is used here, is the phrase that the people who shared a common way of life. Now, this implies to me, and I think to you also, a very specific sort of subsistence activity that is related to an
Or
industry.
maybe one,
No, more than one, right?
a complex,
A
perhaps, of
subsistence complex,
activities.
all right? Now, there are problems involved here, I think, because the industry as such then is a reflection of a multivariant process. you could conceivably have these same people sharing a common way of life, practicing seasonally restricted subsistence activities and producing what we would think were different materials.
But that's not the only definition.
Well, no,
That's
but
not the only part
but
of it.
what I'm getting at here, you see, is that what you will get in the archaeological situation is, no, I'm looking right here. An industry has both cultural and historical reality, represents the material remains of the people who shared a common way of life, etc.
Yeah,
Now-
who used and made the same kinds
Right.
of tools and who held the same technological skills and
All
preferences.
right, now, my,
So
my,
that's-
my question here, you see, is that it is conceivable, for instance, a paper on the Wick-Montan in northern Arnhem Land by Johnson in '39 goes through the seasonal subsistence activities of a group of people. They produce different tools, they have different kinds of shelters in accordance with the season in which they are living. Now, the problem here is, these are the same people. Now, an industry essentially here has cultural reality. Nonetheless, in the archaeological situation, we might look at this material and say it's not the same typologically. Stylistically, there is difference, and there is so much difference that we cannot put them together.
Technologically.
Now,
yes,
what
they're
I'd like to
different.
argue here, then, is that the basis of an industry definition should be a technological one, and that the typological or stylistic variation might be better seen as different facies of an industry, which may represent seasonality or may represent something else.
But you said just before that we often can't tell technology from technological,
Well,
from
I
typological
think there-
aspects, and we all agreed that that's so.
Yes, but I think there are also specific technological parameters which one can look at.
Yeah, I would agree. But
And-
are
What
they
about,
not,
what
are
about
not
the
so
guys who
gross
practice
that they're
different
useless?
techniques in different seasons or different
That's right,
places?
sure.
What
This
do you
is,
get?
this is a problem.
There
I
isn't
don't
any
know.
way
I
you can
sus-
cut the pie,
I suspect.
which will get you off the hook that there is the possibility
Exclusive, that's
that stone morphology doesn't have a one-to-one relationship with culture, if that's what you're trying to classify.
I don't disagree with you, Glenn, but I suspect.
But can't we shoot
on
at
the
an
evidence that
ideal?
Well, I suspect on the evidence that I've seen that the technology changes, lithic technology changes more slowly than the typology. And therefore, it might be possible to look for longer, more stabilized patterns in the technological parameters than in the typological.
Well, that's only true if you're talking at a very gross level, because you could argue you cannot have typological change unless you have increasing technological sophistication, et cetera.
And typological change.
I think that this ball of wax is all tied up together. I don't see how you can unscramble these things,
Sure.
except at very low levels, you know.
Certainly, it gets down in evaluation, a matter of judgment. When we're dealing there with the Kormusen and Hoffman, which apparently coexisted, or would suggest from the geological evidence that they may well have coexisted in this limited area and with different traditions. Are we going to say those are two activity differences, or are we going to, and that's certainly going to have to be one explanation that you're going to have to offer to resolve.
That's right.
And then, among other explanations.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you need an explanation at this particular point. It may be, it's going to be a lot easier to define industries on the basis of certain technological or typological criteria, and not worry about what the cultural realities of this thing may be at this particular point, because you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody, whether or not it's one group in 3 seasons or 3 groups in 1 season each or something of this sort. But if you have certain industries that you define somehow on the basis of some observable characteristics, then you might make some hypotheses. Then you can go out. If you think they may be seasonal differences, then you can go out and start looking. You can start digging some sites.
Right.
You're not going to solve it on the basis of survey material, certainly, or not likely. Or you may look at distributions of where they occur with respect to resources, things like this. But to bring a lot of culture into the definition of an industry at this level of analysis, I think is, the implications are hanging you up too much.
Premature.
Yeah, it's premature.
I don't think so. I think you ought to have sort of an ideal you're trying to achieve.
Okay, well, I was arguing that way the first time around, and
Switch?
nobody buys this, at least in practice.
Well,
Maybe
I'm
some sympathy
thinking of
in
an experience
theory.
we had with McKern in the Midwest. where he absolutely denied that any of these collections of things had any cultural or socio-political reality and never wanted any. He only wanted to look at a group of objects, and somehow was never really interested in culture.
This is where we get the artifacts interbreeding.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if you want to start with culture, let's say what the hell culture does. Let's say, what are the correlates of a particular cultural system in stone tools? Because this is what we have to work with. What are the correlates in settlement pattern? What are the correlates in subsistence? What are we looking for? Okay, it may turn out that what we're looking for does not exist in the kind of information we have. Then we can scrap this business and go out and sell ties.
On the other hand, it's already well documented that there is a pattern, however subtle.
Okay, well then let's
context.
specify what this pattern is. And then say, all right, well, this is what we're looking for. What in the archaeological evidence is going to tell us this?
Well, it is possible, just to hark back to the discussion that Dirk Rodden's done, it is possible that it may be useful to interpose two alternative levels between the assemblage, potential levels between the assemblage and the industry. And the ones proposed were phase, which has the advantage that in two legitimate meanings of the word phase, and the advantage and the disadvantage, in, say, chemistry, we're talking about some kind of lateral shift in perhaps mechanical properties, whereas it has also a chronological meaning, so you could use it, phase, both for minor geographic variant, or a minor time variant, time-based, time-correlated variant. And the other term, of course, that is widely used is facies, where you actually express, by using the word facies, the notion that this is only a part of a larger whole, a distinctive part. Now, it is right that you only resort to these devices, and this is in a sense where the French are right, you only resort to these devices when you've made up your mind about the existence of the larger level, which you then find it convenient to subdivide. So there are sort of cycles and epicycles in the thing. If you do bring your cultural objectives in, on the other hand, I think we probably all agree that we would be at sea if we devised a system which had which was not designed to keep us in mind of the fact that ultimately, although we're classifying artifacts, our interests
Okay, if we
are
agree that we're
beyond.
classifying artifacts, it's a very simple job, I think.
That's right.
If that is our end, then it's a very simple job. As soon as we say that we're classifying artifacts because we want to find out about culture, then we get in trouble.
That's right, but on the other hand, the question is whether it's worth wrestling with this trouble. And saying if trouble or no, you don't come out with something. And surely there are analogous problems in stratigraphic nomenclature with facies, lateral change, and so on. But this doesn't mean that it isn't worth devising a system for having a limited number of words by which into which you group your rock. So you're not just, in stratigraphy, you're not just classifying lithology. And that's why you have trouble.
I think it's maybe time to have a coffee break. What a cold drink.
I think the old keg should have been out there.
Tony, since he has prepared these papers on the sorts of observations or the requirements, I suppose, that we have sort of used as a working model for what we mean by assemblage and what we mean by industry. If we could discuss these things as each one of these requirements or each one of these guides that we have, and perhaps say something about what we try to learn by applying these, and then have you take them apart or add to them or whatever it needs to be done on them. You want to do that? Okay. Well, there are 2 points here that I think we've picked up already in some discussion, that the sample is sufficiently large that you have a range of the originally present lithic artifact in 2 classes. Here you deal with what you have. When you only have 20 tools or what, but we would ideally hope that our samples would be large enough so that they would have some statistical reality, and most statisticians talk in terms of samples more than 200 of the units that you're using for a definition. And that we have, as a working arrangement, tended to get as large a samples as we possibly could, and tended to avoid expending our energies on situations where less than 200 would be recovered.
You know, Fred, the sample size that you need statistically is going to depend on the number of types you have.
Well, the degree of variability.
The degree of variability, yeah, which in this case would presumably be typology.
Well, I hope not.
Right.
Is there any way to make that determination in the field, do you think? I know we'll get into this tomorrow probably.
Everyone agrees that the larger the better.
Well, I realize that, but this can lead to problems of quite unbelievable complexity.
But this is tomorrow.
Yeah, I suppose.
And the other thing that's involved here is that these samples be collected systematically, and that it not involve selective collections. We, on occasion, made samples and then went out and picked up additional specimens to enrich them. We would have rejected this phenomenon. I take it that there's no one here that's been particularly innocent of that since it has occurred elsewhere, I think.
Doesn't that depend on what you're measuring again? What if you're sampling a sample size that you happen to know, you have the edges of it, okay? 1,000 items, all right? And you find that of the 1,000 items, 1,000 things, okay? And you sooner or later divide it up into, let's say, 10 categories of these things. You then sample it, okay? And you get only one of the things that is represented by 100 objects, okay? Now, if you want to study the variation and the real makeup of that 100 objects, you're not going to learn very much from having one. So you might specifically go back and resample just in order to understand that problem.
But this is still systematic.
Of course it is, but it's the goal that it seems to me that determines how you're going to do this.
But you tell us you did this.
Yes, you certainly want to keep your samples clearly separated, and on page, this Lou Ditto manuscript that came out, on page 4 are listed there the types of observations that we've tried to make on our material that we call them an assemblage. And you see here the types of technological observations. We've grouped them into two areas, technological and typological. Seems the easiest way just to look at these and comment on them as questions arise. Fikri, could you discuss how you have a little paper? You have a little paper here that's also been passed out on the debitage.
Yeah, this is.
Could you discuss that and maybe show what sort of diagrams are used to present this data and that sort of thing?
Okay. This is only concerned with the study of the debitage fraction of the lithic assemblage. Similar studies are done on the cores and on the retouched tools. This paper shows the kind of measurements that we have been experimenting with and some of the results that we have achieved. We have found that these measurements, which are listed on the first page, the measurement of the parameters, the 5 parameters given on the first page, were significant in showing some of the similarities and differences between the debitage of different assemblages. These included the length-width ratio, the length, the width, the type of platform, and the raw material.
Fikri, could you show those on those diagrams up there on those length-width ratios?
Yeah, these are the...
I was on those diagrams behind you.
Yeah,
on the wall.
this diagram, we have a scatter pattern or diagram of the, this is the length and this is the width of the blades and the flakes. And this is designed to show the different length width classes that exist in the assemblage, or in the debitage in the assemblage. Several length width ratios were set arbitrarily to construct a histogram to find out the variations within the debitage on the basis of the length width ratio. This histogram is unimodal and shows that the debitage in this assemblage consists mainly of flakes that vary in their length width ratio from 1 to 1 to 3 to 2, which we have chosen to call wide flakes. We have the equant flakes and sub-equant flakes and non-flakes, and we have the acicular or needle-like blades, the wide, the cylinder blades, the wide blades, and narrow blades. In this assemblage, we got a bimodal curve indicating the presence of two populations in the debitage. One of them is a blade fraction, and the other one is the flake component. There, the blades are this side and flakes are this side. And the blades in the debitage of this assemblage consist of the wide blades, whereas the flakes in this part consist of the equant fraction, which falls in this book.
Fikri, are you measuring entire populations of flakes and blade debitage from the site, or are you taking samples?
No, you take samples. The sample used in this case is 300 blades, and in this case 150 blades, and the flakes here are 300. The population of the sample used is indicated below in the diagram.
How do you determine the representativeness of that sample?
Chi-square. That's as to the length width ratio.
I think we could add here that one of the reasons for doing this is not only descriptive, but as we work north in the Nile, we got to those areas where you constantly see references to, well, this is a blade industry, as opposed to a flake industry. And this really doesn't have much meaning unless you can define it. And it seemed that this was a way of defining it, not what the tools were made on. We may find in that first case that 80% of the tools, in fact, were made on blades. But in terms of the primary production of flake and blades, what was the technological aspects of its production? I think this can show it quite well.
The other,
Is that allowed?
the comment I was going to make, that one is seen popping up in archaeology, and since I don't know what you've done with these figures, I can't say whether or not it applies to you, but people are measuring things like this, which are beautiful continuous variables, and then they go and convert them back into classificatory classes. And this, I think, is disaster. A thing like that has an elegance expressed in terms of means, peak values, deviations. You could probably find what the distribution pattern is and so forth. And it's just crazy if you've done that, then translate it back to a type list where you divide them into arbitrary segments of the continuum. And this has been done in the study of the British hand axe industry, to translate it into numbers and then to turn the numbers back into categories. It's totally unnecessary.
One other point, it's not just an observation about those. These two collections are from the same locality, but it happened when we looked at this locality, this was a rather restricted area, we could not distinguish clusters. There was no tight cluster here and a tight cluster here. But by walking across the surface of the site and then examine it before we dug the trenches and looking at surface material. It appeared that some areas had more of certain kinds of tools in them than the other area had. There were certain apparent differences and this incidentally indicates that the debitage is also different.
Is there a lower size limit to the flakes and blades that you're using? Or
Yeah.
do you take everything irrespective of size?
The limit is both between the blades and the flakes, but the ends are open.
You mean,
Trying to get at-
you mean
What
that-
I
what
mean is,
if-
do you include something that is, say, sort of 4 millimeters long or something like that?
No, you exclude chips. This is only done for.
Even though they're complete flakes or blades?
Well,
What
this
is
is
the
the problem.
cutoff
What
that
is
you
a
use?
chip?
What's the
again?
base of each?
This depends on the smallest size of the tool that exists in the assemblage itself. If it is a micro-depth assemblage, then you should take the small flake chips in consideration.
This
But
is
even though-
dangerous
even
because
though
you're then
that's-
going to get non-comparable numbers. That is, the means would stop meaning anything. If you, pardon my putting it like this, if you use a different cutoff for each assemblage. And
Well, you
you'll
have to
find too that
specify
even if you're dealing with a ratio where technically sizes aren't, in fact, these elongation ratios usually show a correlation of size. That is, the absolutely longer a thing is usually the relatively longer it is. At least in the work I've done, is what sort of so.
Well, but you specify that you do that for the flakes and the blades which are not chips, and then you define the chips. So
Yeah.
if somebody works on a small flakes, which he considers chips, and they are defined, then there would be no confusion.
But we've been talking about the problem of comparability, and it's
Yeah.
silly to build in,
Yeah.
if we can avoid it, non-comparabilities. That
Yeah.
is, figures which in fact statistically are never going to be able to be compared properly because the procedure varies from
It would be
case to case.
possible to see that to take the sample of chips and simply do a random sample of those and create such a similar diagram for them.
But then what are chips? You see, are
Could
chips
we have a
whole
definition
flakes
of
and
chips?
This will be
blades, or are
stated.
they simply just broken pieces?
Our definition chips were those flakes or bladelets produced which were too small to be utilized for tools in that assemblage.
Because we use a different definition. We use everything that is a flake or a blade, however small it is, everything that is complete, in other words, is classified as a flake or a blade.
It has a platform and a cone.
It has a platform and a barb of percussion.
What
It
are
has an
you-
end to it as well.
What's
Uh,
in
it-
your group then, when you put all that in?
Chips, that goes into flakes and blades. Chips are anything that are incomplete flakes, fragments of flakes, blades,
Meaning
and so on.
with no limit of
Chunks,
size?
chunks and so on,
With no limit of size, is that?
with no limit to size.
If you had a flake this large and the butt was broken off this much, you put
Then it
that
goes,
into
then
chips.
it goes into chips,
Chips?
chunks.
I can't see it.
Totally different approach.
I can't see it.
You cannot, I mean, you cannot measure a flake that is
That's
that
right.
long,
Well,
that
it's
has
not
had its butt removed.
No, you do not
It's
measure.
not measured.
What is the value of it?
Yes,
Well,
but
it's
on
not
the other
in
hand,
our-
you
it's
aren't
not measured.
measuring all flaked stone, are you?
Only entire
Well,
pieces
you're
are
not.
measured.
We
Yeah,
can,
exactly, well,
because we can
that-
determine whether
but he was
flakes are
including it
blades.
in the measured group, surely.
Yeah, but you're not
No,
using
no, no,
everything
no, no,
which is
No,
complete.
only entire pieces are
You're,
measured.
you're
No
it would
broken
be-
all the
pieces are ever
smaller
measured.
The
flakes
procedure
and
that we
blades.
used
Yeah.
here was,
Well, that's what we do. We
Only
only
the
measure-
smaller end of it, if, to
Completely.
be honest.
But then you
This
have a
distortion
cutoff.
At once.
Of course.
A lower
But you've got
limit.
apples and
Yes,
oranges and
for
stuff.
instance,
What is the lower
for
limit?
the
I mean, is it 10
The half
millimeters?
it
or-
was
It's usually
somewhere
about 10 millimeters.
10 to
Yeah.
12 millimeters.
Well, aren't you?
Millimeter usually.
no, the procedure that
What
was
is
used was
debitage
simple.
after all?
Yeah, well, it might just be
No, hang on,
sensible
that's another
Translate
question.
the
to
term
fix
to English.
arbitrarily a lower
two
size limit
altogether.
for all industries.
We're measuring,
That's basically
we're trying to
what we've
get some
done.
measure of a.
Yeah, well, this is something that could be subject to wide
Right.
agreement.
Exactly, okay. And
So
it-
you need
And then
to-
anybody's mean.
As long as it's stated, it should be enough.
See, I think there's certain disadvantages to both, both procedures that I can see. I can understand your position, but I can also see that you may, by the way or the situation, you'll have a higher frequency of your blades will be broken. And therefore, your blade tube, or your blade frequency in the debitage will be distorted because you put those all in chips.
Especially if they're long, they're more likely to break than if
Yeah,
they're short.
I guess it's quite likely that you've distorted your frequency. You see that, so there are 2 points here. There's the thing that we have left out, some of our things that you would call flakes and blades, and put them in chips, these very small flakes. But you have also probably distorted the ratio between flakes and blades, because the long, narrow blades are more likely to be broken, and therefore they go into chips.
Well, you're talking about two different things.
But you don't measure them
Yeah,
either.
we're
we
talking
don't.
about
We're not
frequency.
measuring
But
them.
we're not talking about frequencies.
Frequency of
There's
the
no
components.
frequencies in that, so.
There is a
Yes,
frequency, yes,
you
sir.
convert back into the frequency.
Well,
There's a
page,
diagram, there's a little bar
Yeah.
down at the bottom that gives frequency.
figure
flakes
number
and
5 in the paper shows the frequency of the different components in the assemblage. The last figure, the number of histograms. The first one is the frequency distribution of the different components.
So chips is your biggest category?
Yeah.
Almost always.
Almost always.
Certainly.
At less than 10 centimeters?
Yeah.
It's like
Oh,
10
it's 10,
millimeters.
oh, yes.
Yeah, you can.
Well, what happens to those that are, I mean, your question of your broken blade, which is more than
It
10
is
centimeters.
counted as a blade, it is not measured.
The lengths are not measured, but they're counted.
Okay, cool.
You see, they're not placed, see,
This are the samples that are used here.
they would not be used in
Yeah.
this kind of a structure, but in determining the ratio of flakes and blades in the debutage, they are counted.
Yeah, but then if you've got a blade like that and you break it into 3 pieces, you've skewed the issue if you count those 3 pieces as 3 blades.
No, they're not counting them, Desmond.
They are counting
Yes,
them.
we're
I'm
counting.
sorry, they're not counting them for this purpose.
Not for
Yes,
the.
he is.
Two quite different purposes, aren't there?
No, Desmond's right. If you've got a
Yeah.
blade which is long enough to break into 3 pieces, which are still of blade dimensions, then you will get a count of 3. However, what we're really saying is that any system we use is going to distort it a little.
That's right.
No,
That's right.
Absolutely.
But you see, you'll have flakes
well-
that are broken in half that you count as 2 flakes.
No, well, we
No,
put them into
we
flake
never- we
fragments.
never
But
count.
I really, I think we're beating around
Yeah,
an unnecessary bush.
Yes, I do too.
Could I ask another question, as one who's been measuring flakes for far longer than is good for him? I notice with much envy and admiration that you've managed to line your things up, and you even have flakes here which are wide. I'd like to know the practical process by which you establish the length, the dimension, presumably from the butt to the tip of a wide flake. Didn't you find that the whole thing tilted around like this? And
Well,
that you
it
got
is-
very variable
The
measurements?
the curvature is, well, you align it according to the maximum.
Dimension.
The axis.
No, the
Yeah,
axis
the
of the blow.
axis. You align the butt down. and-
Yeah, but butts don't go down. Butts tend to be knobbly and curved and so on.
No.
Why don't we
necessarily.
not-
Well,
You can see, you can see
use
the
it as a
axis,
real-
See the axis of the blow. That's-
so are feet, but you
Sometimes.
still can get.
Wow, I
Depending
would
on the
be able to
levels.
see it. How do you set up the axis on that one here?
Well, you'd have to see the
Well-
bowl of percussion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
then
depending
what?
on the bowl of the percussion, it's
Yes.
the line dividing.
Draw one up there with a bow.
Well, we assume that this is a line, we assume that this is a line perpendicular to the horizontal axis. That's why we didn't consider it necessary to put these bulbs down.
Yeah, well, the corner struck case is the problem one.
Yeah.
That is the
Well,
problem
you
one.
consider that as the axis and standardize it this way.
In the direction
What you
of the
need is a standard position.
Yes,
And
but-
that's the standard position we chose.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's at
But-
right angles to the axis or the plane of the platform, is that it?
This is the axis.
The axis.
Yes, I know,
axis of the blow.
The axis of the blow.
Yes, but sometimes you can't tell
That's
which
right,
direction the player was
Yeah,
traveling.
sometimes you
Yeah,
can.
occasionally you can, but it's a small
No.
percent.
Anyway, I mean, I used it
No,
as
it's
a
no,
if
I
you
would
just
not
lined
count.
up the shoulder of the
I've worked with
platform,
some, and it's-
but as the basic.
Once you work with it,
Yeah, I know, I've been working with it for years. Can't see it, I'm afraid.
Well, how do you do it?
The
How do you do
axis
it
of
on
the-
a side strut, on a side strut?
I had to give up the whole problem of taking total assemblies, and I'm not sure I followed you, but you're making an arbitrary division at presumably breadth over length equals 0.5, and then you put one side of flakes and the other
Yeah,
side of blades. Yeah. Well, I had to do this eventually
Yeah.
and treat them as an arbitrary divided pair of sets,
Like
and
anything
simply take
under-
the maximum dimension and leave it at that, the maximum dimension of the specimen, because I ran into so much trouble trying to establish where the axis is. If I was going to retain any control at all, I just had to.
Well, I think you were
Find
making the
another
point
way
that if you have a curve like this, as the assemblies there on the left, you might question whether this division from inflection blades is a real thing in that instance.
Yeah.
Is that what
Well, it's
you were
bound,
suggesting
yeah.
before?
Yeah, well, this is a problem that's exercised me for a long time, and this is the only way, I think, of tackling. I'm very pleased to see.
And so, but in many cases, at least in the Central Egyptian sites, which are characterized by a high bladelet or blade debitage, a high percentage of it, there is not this flowing in from under 2 to 1 and over 2 to 1. You have a separation. I mean, a real separation.
Can you
Right,
bimodal?
exactly. You have,
Bimodal
like
like that.
many of the
Like
blades
the other
will
one.
be from 3 to 1, 4 to 1, you see, and the flakes would be from 1.5 to 1 to 1.
Yeah, well, these are very
Bimodal.
interesting features,
Great.
and I think this is a line of approach which is quite as important as a good old typology type list.
It's also very easy to get mean standard deviation and.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
Yeah,
Well, not for bimodal things, actually, then you're in trouble
Yeah.
when you want to get a single parameter.
Have you been doing student t-tests and all this kind of?
Yeah, we have done the chi-square test for this parameter and for other parameters to compare assemblages. If you would look at the last figure, same figure, figure number 5, and then you would see that the different histograms of the length-width ratio, the length and the platform type and the raw material are given. And then in the in appendix number 2, the statistical correlation is given. And then you can draw your conclusion whether they are significantly similar at the critical value of chi-square at 0.05 level of significance, which we have chosen for our. So we can say with certain measure of assurance whether they are similar or not. In this case, there is only one thing in which they differ, which is the raw material of the primary flakes. But this is, I don't think that would be that significant, because in all the other aspects they are well correlated, so we can say that these two are.
By the way, in typology, these are very different two assemblies. Isn't that
Yeah,
correct?
this is interesting because this was certain questions, the relationship between typology and technology, whether changes in technology would be associated with changes in typology and so on.
It's so different. For
These are such
instance, one of them
typologically
is
different.
that site that you saw on the table that had all the Bjorns, big, long basal blunted points, and these converging denticulates. And the other one is the industry with the trapezes, the triangles,
They're also different in
oddball
age.
geometrics.
Different in age also.
Yes, they're different. in age.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I would say a very good demonstration of the power of using continuous variables, always using classical.
And there's something else that I'm not sure I understand, the discussion there on the raw material. Tony, do you know what, that's your data?
This was something we did a couple of years ago. It was just a start to the sorts of things that seemed reasonable. This was from the Deba area, and they represent two groups of sites, the Karak group and this early Khartoum related, which had the same distribution through space. Sites would be very close to one another, and therefore they had assumed the same availability of raw materials. But it was quite clear, just looking at the sites, that the utilization of raw materials was extremely different. So, but when we looked at the tools, just retouch tools, it came out that the utilization of raw material was very much the same. And these last points represent the tools. But when we looked at this point, we were just taking cores, flakes, and tools. Flake category including blades, which were extremely rare at these sites. we found that the pattern of usage was radically different. That although people apparently in the early cartoon-related group collected and brought large numbers of quartz pebbles to their sites, they apparently took only 1 or 2 flakes off each pebble and almost never retouched the quartz into tools. While proportionately, they collected many fewer chert pebbles, but they utilized them to a much greater extent. Many more flakes were removed from each, and a much higher percentage of those were made into tools than for any other category. And so it was possible to say that, well, they ended up very similarly. They went through a different process of selection, and at different stages they made different selections, suggesting that this was an element which was quite different in the two groups, even though they ended up more or less the same way. Now we're trying things a little more complicated than this, by tool classes and by artifact classes, to see how that correlates, and we haven't finished any of that yet, but it looks quite promising. Now, of course, this is only good for comparison within areas where the sites have the same availability of raw materials. It would be useless to compare this with something with Wadi Halfa, for instance, where the raw material availability is very different, or with East Africa. But I think within an area, then it can be very significant.
Some of the other observations that go on with this thing, because we don't try to get through it. This number of techniques of and frequency of the techniques of flaking present in the assemblage this can be determined on the platform preparation on the flakes and blades and cores using some agreed upon typology, and the shapes and categories of generalized shape categories for blades and flakes. As in blades, for instance, their profile from ventral profile, how they look at the distal end, and their lateral profile, and their generalized forms on flakes, what their generalized outline was.
And we're doing it with blades. We're just starting to do it with flakes. I think there's much less control with flakes, and I don't think it'll be as useful, probably. But certainly for blades, the sites Jim talked about, although they're both producing blades, the blades look very different. It's probably a direct function of difference in the cores. But there are certain industries that seem to consistently produce naturally pointed blades, and some which seem to consistently produce blunt blades. And while it's true they're both producing blades, they're not the same at one level.
Yeah, this is one of the differences you find in the North African sites between, say, the Horizon Collignon stuff in Sidi Mansour and Lala, pointed versus blunt.
At least in pressure work, the distal end morphology of a blade is controlled largely not by the form of the core as much as it's controlled by the means or the pressure and the angle at which you detach it from the core. I don't know whether the same strictures hold in percussion work, because I haven't tried it.
Well, this may be, but whatever the factor is, it seems to be fairly standard from some
Yes,
sites.
yeah,
I mean,
sure.
if we're getting at only the fact that they are pushing blades off at a different angle, that is getting at an essential difference in the technology.
Yeah, it would be
It's a
interesting
pattern
to see
of
what kind of
behavior.
correlation you can draw between that and the form of core that is used,
Yeah.
because this is obviously the controlling variable.
So point of information, have you people come across the work of Steve Daniels, on measurements and a measurement system?
Seems to me you sent it to me a long time ago.
Every
Of
time.
platform angles.
No.
Who was that then? Oh, well, I guess there's one other thing that's just been passed around. This is in relation to some material that's being published that the Scandinavians excavated in the cataract area. One of the things that struck me as I was looking at the cores was there seemed to be quite a difference between platform angles on plate cores as opposed to plate cores. And I had started by just measuring platform angles and was going to give a range and a mean standard deviation for it. And then it seemed that blade cores had much more acute angles, for the most part, than plate cores. So I separated them on that basis. And this represents a comparison of 3 assemblages, showing that there was radically different platform angles. And that if I had given just a mean, it really wouldn't have meant very much. That the platform angle is apparently important depending on what you're producing on the piece. Now, we don't have any comparable data from the Nile at the moment to see whether this, well, David is doing some now. I don't know how, whether this is specific to the group that I'm studying, or whether it's a general technological trait that's very functional and will be very widespread.
Well, I don't know what your means are here, but I think it's approximately the same as material from Isla.
So it's probably
Depends also on your technique. The Mexicans got along very well with a 90-degree angle.
Yeah, well, I think on pressure flaking,
Yeah, oh, yes.
a 90-degree angle is obviously the functional one, but this I don't think was pressure flaking.
Actually, on pressure flaking, you have to have a flat platform.
Yeah.
But you also have to have, it has to have a purchase, either a small nib or you grind it off. And you find that when you in fact use the pressure implement, it is at an angle to the edge of something between, I don't know, 60 degrees off vertical, something along that line. You can't press straight down and take off the blade. It must be at an angle. It can't be done straight down.
So you
The
may
same
be-
is true of punch.
Yeah, so the point is that in this case, instead of adjusting the angle by the platform angle, the core, you're adjusting it by the angle at which you work it.
Except that Crabtree pushes pretty straight down and gives it an outward nudge
Not with a short punch, only with a very long
with his
one.
crutch.
Yeah, but with the short one, you must work at an angle, and the difference there is obviously mechanical.
Could we hear how you measure the angle on a core? Do you take one measurement in one place on the core, or several? and
Well,
take a mean?
happily, most of these cores are, all of these cores were small pebble cores, and almost all of them were unfaceted, in the sense there was just a single plane forming the platform. When the core was semicircular, I would take approximately the center of the plate surface and measure from the plate surface to the platform. What I was measuring with, I felt, did not permit me to measure with an accuracy of less than a variation of about 5 degrees.
You measure then from the flake surface, the platform there. Now, some of these cores, particularly if a punch has been used, have this curve over the top. What do you do about that? You don't measure that curve?
No, I don't measure that. If this were the core, the pebble with the flake surface here, the measurement was taken here to there. Now, often there will be on all of these cores a little roughing effect, which changes this angle slightly. But what we were measuring here was basically this angle.
You're you're all right when you've got this nice straight angle, but when you have this curve problem, which you get not infrequently on punch.
This is usually a very small area.
I think he's talking about the.
Yeah,
curve
that's the
that
problem,
makes
and
the
that's
Oh,
what
you
we,
mean this?
that's
You
what
mean
we
this?
measure.
Yes,
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Yeah, that's it. Now you got a problem.
I must say, we didn't have
Yeah, so it's a
And you
trick
have
that
as
you
well,
could pull
you
on a
see,
few
this,
assemblages.
But I would imagine what I would do in this case would be, in fact, measure it that way.
But then you have to
You
decide the
have
point at
that,
which to
you
take
see.
the tangent.
Now, do you measure that,
Yeah.
or do you
It's
measure
a horrible
that?
business, this angle
and
work.
that?
We don't,
That's,
we didn't have any of those, but if I did, the system I used would have been to measure that.
Yeah.
because we measure this, what is we measuring that and that on the curve.
I
In which
wonder
case you
though
get quite
whether
different-
this curve comes after the core has been utilized a while, and
Yep.
whether the formation of the platform is not in fact made first in concept to the face of the pebble.
It seems to
And then
be
it shifts as
from-
you continue to work it. And after a while, you probably have to change the platform or abandon the core.
Board seems to, as a result of these experiments he's been doing, just that this is a vital part of the preparation of the platform to get that angle, so that you have got this convex edge to the platform, so that the blade will come off when you strike it.
And you get an incurvate blade.
Yeah.
Well,
No, you don't. No, you
don't.
don't. You get a more or less straight one, but you get that characteristic little nibbling on the top of the on the butt end on the.
Well then, what is this, just a millimeter or so at the platform?
Maybe up to 4 millimeters, something like that. yes.
The nibbling
Yeah.
is in large
But
part.
it is important.
The nibbling is in large part the necessity of taking off the lip that forms when the previous piece is detached. Because if you leave the lip on, you won't get anything off, you'll get a hinge.
You
crack.
don't get the angle.
Right.
The angle
You
is
must
gone.
every
After
single
you've
core,
removed-
almost
You've got to
every
remove
core
it.
will get
You
Yep.
must remove that lip.
Exactly.
It's not in essence changing the angle, but what it's doing is changing the physical structure of it's changing the mass, actually, of the area that you'll strike.
Well, you've changed the angle when you've removed the last blade, and so you've got to prepare it again to get the
Yeah, all
angle
right,
back.
okay,
And that's
on
why
that
you
basis,
get
yeah.
that.
Now, should we measure them the way you're measuring them? This is the key point that I think we need to find
Well, I
out.
think
Which
we
one are
have-
we, which one?
Well,
are
I
we-
don't know
We
whether-
have the same kinds of cores here.
This is where one needs to reach some kind of agreement.
The other possibility is that they make these splendid little machines, I don't know if you've seen them, called adjustable templates, that you can press over the thing and you can get a profile.
Yeah.
And it would be possible to set up a much more highly standardized system of measurements on an accurate profile than you ever can with the goniometer slipping around on smooth surfaces. This is what we took to eventually. I hate angles because we're not dealing with plane surfaces. This is the trouble. And angles may sometimes be useful, but they're horribly imprecise, unless for some reason or other your chaps are working in plane surfaces. But this is the exception rather than the rule, I think, in stone tools.
Well, the interesting thing here, I think, is that Tony and I have come up on two widely separated industries in time and space, evidently, with rather similar data for the different production of flakes and blades.
You've probably got a point to prove about the nature of conchoidal fracture,
Yeah.
rather than about the taxonomy of stone tools.
Yeah.
But
Well, this may well be.
Yeah, I don't think any of us.
On the other hand, I'm not sure if the Near Eastern cores really fall into this observation.
No, but certainly some of the European ones do.
Some do, certainly, but I think some of the ones I have from the Negev don't.
well, I'd say for a start, with flake cores in
Maybe a different
sub-Saharan Africa
technique.
don't usually have 90-degree angles.
Tony, have you framed an experiment like this, taken the same sample of cores and got 2 or 3 people to do the measurements and find out
Well,
whether there's
actually, the
significant
measurements
areas?
on
Well, they
these
may be
were
clear.
done
See, we're only
by
talking
two
about
different
one
people,
core.
different assemblages.
Yes.
We're talking about a
Anyway.
single
They were, and they
technique.
came out.
This is- that's what this is.
Mhm.
Yeah, but now have you done it with the same assembly? It might be worth a try just to
Well,
find
I'm
out
sure
what the
there's-
limits of
I'm
error
sure
are
there's-
in the technique.
I felt there was a fairly large limit of error, and that's why I have
Yeah.
the 5-degree range.
Yeah, yeah.
It turns out every other way these assemblages are the same.
I'd
And one
like to
would
make a
predict
procedural
that this
request.
goes-
If one is making
I'd like to make a
mistakes,
procedural request. I don't know what the mood of the company is, but I would, for instance, like to hear some discussion, principally from the people who worked in UBI and who set out a subdivision, a classification of industries in UBI, some exposition of a hierarchical system. We've talked briefly about just the two-step thing of assemblage to industry, but I would be interested to hear further discussion both of that and the possibility, the utility or otherwise in these circumstances of even higher order divisions. And we were arguing yesterday, or at least skirmishing around the question of totally unrelated and so on. Are there higher orders of relationship that whether we have terms for them or not, we need to discuss ways of recognizing and talking about.
Well, let's proceed then on with what we've gone through this business about describing the assemblage, and we have a series of these assemblages, and then let's go to the next building block. And that we would propose then that we have a group of these out of the information that we have available. A group of these assemblages share some attributes or some qualities in common, which on a subjective judgment are closer together than others. What we're looking at and have not yet arrived at is how we can define metrically what those boundaries might be. But certainly we would hope that before we would offer a name for an industry, and in effect I think someone said clutter the literature, that there would be a series of sites, not one, that would give us some area. Therefore we could define this industry can be defined specifically in terms of area. It can be defined specifically in terms of its stratigraphic context. It can be presumably, therefore, defined specifically in terms of its time range. It's therefore been defined both vertically and horizontally. And we would then propose that we would offer the following technological and typological definitions about the parameters of the industry based upon those sites which we had grouped together. Now, having done this, this industry, or there might then be a series of industries which, though differing, what we would say, again, this vague term, markedly, also share certain things in common. Case in point would be our 12 and 13 site that we were discussing yesterday, and we were saying they're quite different without being able to specify what's quite different. We have not gone beyond this level of building block to what do we mean by these. I think my personal feeling is that to say these belong to the general cycle of blades of the North African thing is, there's ladies present, so I won't say what I think it is, but I think it has absolutely no value. And it does tell us nothing.
Meaning.
It has limited meaning, yes. What is the next level of abstraction or next level of building on these cultural, industrial blocks that we're talking about?
You've already put it, you said industrial block. Industrial complex, industrial,
Well,
this is what people put them into. I don't care what.
Can we start from another way around? From inside Nubia, it may look like nonsense to discuss a common entity along North Africa of some order. From outside, it is certainly true that it looks as if you've got something going in North Africa and including the Nile, which you don't have going in the adjacent regions and in the Sahara, in this part, and in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, however you handle the problem, there is something different. There are a set of things which, for all that they may be diverse, have something in common with one another. They may, in some way, attach themselves to, one might think that they attach themselves to some kind of culture area concept. Yeah, I mean, this is the question. If you look at it from inside, you may say, well, I'm so impressed by the diversity that I don't really want to do anything more about talking about a common order. If you look at it from outside, then you have a different perspective, and you say, well, you know, if they just say we've got 50 things, whatever it is, whatever the sum total of bladelet industries that have been defined in the Nile, must be about 10 right now. They got 10, and they're all completely different. And you know, we don't wish to in any way link them at any level, but we're going to treat them as quite as separate from one another as any one of them is from, say, the Sibyllian or the things that were being picked up further up the Nile and so on. Then you are left with an undefined pattern.
We got hung on that, and if anyone took the pains or had the stubbornness to stay with that Nubian thing that we did, you would see that we had